For 30 years, Johnny Carson was America's nightly companion, the familiar face that flickered into living rooms 5 nights a week, the reassuring voice that helped millions wind down before sleep. He seemed like an old friend, someone you knew intimately through countless hours shared together. But here's the unsettling truth that becomes clearer with each passing year since his death. We didn't know Johnny Carson at all. The man who seemed so accessible, so present, so genuinely connected to his audience, was actually performing one of the greatest magic tricks in entertainment history. He made you believe you knew him while revealing almost nothing of substance about who he actually was. Behind that warm Midwestern smile and impeccable comic timing lived perhaps the most deliberately enigmatic superstar American television has ever produced. Carson didn't accidentally become private. He chose mystery with the same intentionality other stars choose publicity. He understood something most celebrities never grasp, that the moment people truly know you, the magic evaporates. Tonight we're diving into the shadows Carson left behind, exploring the questions he refused to answer, the relationships he never explained, and the emotions he kept locked away even from those closest to him. The spectacular implosion of Johnny Carson's relationship with Joan Rivers remains one of television's most discussed betrayals. For years, Rivers served as Carson's permanent guest host, the apparent heir to his late-night throne. Then in 1986, she accepted her own competing show without telling Carson directly. His response was immediate and absolute. Rivers was banned from The Tonight Show, a prohibition that outlasted Carson's own tenure and continued until Jimmy Fallon finally welcomed her back in 2014, nearly a decade after Carson's death. What makes this severance so haunting is Carson's complete and utter silence about it. While Rivers spoke openly for decades about the rift, repeatedly expressing regret and claiming she'd tried calling Carson multiple times to apologize, he never once publicly acknowledged the hurt or anger he must have felt. A Tonight Show staff member who worked closely with Carson during this period revealed that the day the news broke, Carson came into the office, read the headline, and went completely white. He simply said she's banned and walked out, never mentioning her name on air again. His silence wasn't merely professional, it was total. He refused her calls, returned her letters unopened, and instructed his staff never to mention her name in his presence. Was it professional betrayal that cut so deep, or personal hurt? Did he feel blindsided by someone he'd mentored and trusted? Was there something deeper in their relationship that made her departure particularly painful? Carson took the true reason for that permanent silence to his grave, leaving everyone, including Joan herself, forever wondering what he really felt. Bob Hope's regular appearances on The Tonight Show seemed to represent a warm friendship between comedy legends spanning different generations. Carson always treated Hope with public deference, laughing at his jokes and showing respect due to a pioneering entertainer who had defined American comedy for decades. Behind the scenes, however, a vastly different dynamic existed, one Carson deliberately kept hidden throughout his career and beyond. A Tonight Show writer who worked on many of Hope's appearances revealed that Carson loathed having Bob Hope on in his later years. Hope would arrive with a stack of canned jokes written by his staff, refusing to engage in actual conversation, just waiting for Carson to feed him set-up lines so he could deliver his prepared material. This approach contradicted everything Carson valued as an interviewer: spontaneity, genuine exchange, unexpected moments that made television come alive. Hope's appearances became increasingly difficult as the older comedian aged, and became even more dependent on cards and pre-written material. He seemed completely uninterested in having a real conversation. Carson would try to engage him about his USO tours or relationships with presidents, hoping for authentic moments, but Hope would acknowledge the question, then immediately pivot back to his prepared jokes. Despite this private frustration, Carson never let his true feelings show on air. He maintained unfailing professional courtesy whenever Hope appeared, laughing at jokes he'd heard numerous times before. Carson once told his production team it was like propping up a wax figure after a particularly stilted Hope appearance in the late 80s. Yet viewers at home saw only Carson's familiar warmth and engagement, never the growing resentment reportedly building behind the scenes. Why did Carson maintain this public charade when he had sufficient stature to politely decline booking Hope if the appearances had become so difficult? Was it respect for Hope's historical importance, pressure from NBC, or perhaps complex feelings about his own place in comedy's evolution? Carson never explained his reasoning even to his closest confidants. He simply continued booking Hope once or twice a year, gritting his teeth through the appearances, then venting his frustration once cameras stopped rolling. Throughout his entire public life, Johnny Carson maintained remarkable restraint when discussing his childhood and family relationships. The few times he mentioned his upbringing in interviews, he offered only the briefest, most sanitized glimpses into his early life in Nebraska and Iowa. In his authorized biography, Carson described his father as distant, but refused to elaborate on a relationship that many who knew him privately suggested had profoundly shaped his adult personality and emotional life. A longtime friend explained that Carson's relationship with his father was clearly complex and probably difficult, but he would shut down completely if anyone tried to explore that territory too deeply. It was the ultimate no-go zone in conversation. This silence becomes particularly intriguing when considering the stark contrasts in Carson's personality that seem to suggest unresolved childhood dynamics. The warm, engaging television host existed alongside a deeply private man known for emotional detachment, difficulty maintaining intimate relationships, and occasional explosive anger. His second wife Joanne observed there were two Johnnies, the one you saw on television, and the one only a few people ever really knew. The private Johnny could be remote, difficult, impossible to reach emotionally. She always felt those traits had roots in his early life, but he refused to discuss that connection even in their most private moments. Carson's silence about his father stands in stark contrast to how many contemporaries or celebrities discuss childhood difficulties openly as part of their public narrative. Carson maintained old-school reticence that kept his private pain firmly behind closed doors. When he died, he left behind no memoir, no revealing interviews, no final reflections on formative relationships. The full depth of his feelings about his father and the influence this relationship may have had on his adult personality remained deliberately unexplored. Despite being one of the most famous men in America for 3 decades, Johnny Carson maintained a remarkably small inner circle. Unlike many celebrities who cultivate large entourages or wide social networks, Carson was known for his selectivity in personal relationships, leaving many wondering who, if anyone, truly knew the man behind the television persona. His longtime lawyer explained that Carson didn't have friends. He had acquaintances. Even people who thought they were close to him would realize, at some point, there was a line they couldn't cross. A level of intimacy that remained off-limits. Throughout his career and retirement, different candidates emerged as Carson's possible closest confidant. Some pointed to Ed McMahon, his on-air sidekick for nearly 30 years. Others suggested his longtime producer. His lawyer himself claimed special status before their falling out in the 80s. Yet Carson never publicly identified anyone as his emotional anchor or closest friend. People assumed it was Ed because of their on-screen chemistry, but their actual relationship was primarily professional. They rarely socialized outside work. Ed was Johnny's perfect professional partner, but not his personal confidant. Others suggested Carson's closest relationship might have been with his younger brother Dick, who worked as a director on The Tonight Show. But Johnny never publicly discussed the depth of this relationship either. If Carson had a true confidant, someone he fully trusted and opened up to, he kept that person's identity private, which was very much in character. Carson believed real intimacy required privacy, that the minute something became public it changed its nature. When Carson died, the question of who had truly known him remained largely unanswered. No close friend emerged to share special insights or previously unknown dimensions of his character. For 30 years, Johnny Carson occupied one of the most influential platforms in American culture, with unprecedented ability to shape public opinion and political discourse. Yet throughout his career, he maintained studied political neutrality on air, poking fun at politicians of all stripes while rarely revealing his own political leanings. This public neutrality made Carson's private political views an object of intense speculation. A writer who worked on the show during the 70s and 80s noted that Carson's balance in his monologues was very deliberate and carefully maintained. It wasn't that he had no opinions, but that he understood his unique position required appearing nonpartisan. In private, Carson occasionally offered glimpses of his political thinking to those in his inner circle. According to some associates, he expressed views that might be described as socially liberal and fiscally conservative, a blend that didn't fit neatly into either major political party. A friend recalled Carson once saying he just wanted smaller government and more layoffs, but he refused to elaborate further or align himself with any particular political movement. What makes Carson's political silence particularly interesting is that it spanned enormous changes in American politics, from the Vietnam era through Watergate, the Reagan Revolution, and into the early Clinton years. Throughout these turbulent times, Carson maintained his role as America's non-threatening late-night companion, never allowing his program to become a platform for his personal political views. Carson interviewed every president from Kennedy to Clinton, yet he never publicly revealed what he truly thought about any of them beyond gentle jokes in his monologues. This restraint appeared to stem from both professional calculation and personal philosophy. Carson understood revealing strong political opinions might alienate portions of his audience, but he also believed certain political reticence was simply appropriate for someone in his position. He viewed himself as an entertainer, not a political commentator, telling people he was there to help them fall asleep, not tell them how to vote. When Johnny Carson signed off from The Tonight Show for the final time in 1992, he did something extraordinary in the entertainment world. He actually stayed retired. Despite numerous opportunities to return to television in various capacities, Carson maintained nearly complete public silence for the remaining 13 years of his life. A former NBC executive revealed that Carson was offered literally millions for comebacks, one-off specials, award show hosting gigs, even just walk-on appearances on other shows. The offers were constant for years after he retired. He turned them all down without explanation. What made Carson's silence particularly intriguing were occasional hints that he hadn't completely disconnected from late-night television. After retirement, he would sometimes send jokes to David Letterman, who would use them in his monologues, a fact Letterman occasionally acknowledged on air. That ghostwriting for Dave suggested Johnny still had the comedy instinct, still followed the news with a comic's eye, but chose to express that instinct privately through Letterman rather than returning to the spotlight himself. According to those close to him during retirement, Carson maintained a complicated relationship with his former career. He reportedly watched his successors with interest, occasionally offering private critiques or praise. He kept a small office in California where he would read newspapers and sometimes jot down joke ideas, yet he resisted all entreaties to make even the briefest return to public performance. A friend who visited him regularly during retirement reflected that there were times when Johnny missed certain aspects of the job. The creative rhythm, the immediate feedback from an audience, the sense of being connected to the national conversation. But he also valued his privacy enormously and understood that any return, however brief, would disrupt the quiet life he'd carefully built. On air, Johnny Carson was famous for his distinctive laugh, a controlled professional response that nonetheless conveyed genuine appreciation for his guests' humor. But according to those who knew him privately, Carson had another laugh entirely, one rarely seen by television audiences. A writer who worked closely with him explained that Johnny had his show laugh, which was real but measured. And then he had his actual uncontrolled laugh when he would completely lose it, sometimes to the point of tears. There was nothing professional about that laugh. It was pure, almost childlike. This private, uninhibited laughter apparently emerged only in very specific circumstances, and with a very small number of people who had the rare ability to break through Carson's famous reserve and trigger genuine, unfiltered amusement. Seeing Johnny completely lose control laughing was like witnessing a unicorn, recalled a producer. It happened so rarely that when it did, everyone would stop and stare. It was almost shocking to see him that unguarded. While various comedians have been suggested as ones who could consistently provoke this reaction, Carson never publicly identified who could reliably make him laugh uncontrollably in private settings. The identity of those who could consistently crack Carson's controlled facade would seem like a minor mystery, yet it represents something more significant. The separation Carson maintained between his public and private selves, and his determination to keep certain authentic reactions and relationships shielded from public view. Throughout his 30-year tenure on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson occasionally disappeared from the air without explanation, sometimes for weeks at a time. While NBC typically attributed these absences to illness or exhaustion. Insiders suggested these periods sometimes coincided with private emotional crises, or what some described as nervous breakdowns. An NBC staff member revealed that Carson reportedly had 2 or 3 serious episodes during the peak of his career, one following his divorce from Joanne in the early 70s, another after the Joan Rivers situation in 1986. These weren't just vacation days, but periods when Johnny was genuinely unable to function professionally. What makes these episodes particularly notable is the extraordinary effort Carson and NBC expended to keep them private. In an era before social media and constant celebrity coverage, the network could attribute Carson's absences to minor health issues or scheduled vacations without facing significant scrutiny. NBC had a well-oiled system for handling Johnny's occasional disappearances. Guest hosts were quickly scheduled, usually with some cover story about Johnny having a minor throat issue or taking a planned break. Carson himself never acknowledged these episodes publicly either during his career or after retirement. Unlike many contemporary celebrities who openly discuss their mental health struggles, Carson maintained absolute privacy about his psychological well-being throughout his life. When Johnny came back, there was an unspoken understanding among staff that no one would mention his absence or ask how he was feeling. It was as if someone had hit a reset button, and everyone was expected to pretend nothing had happened. Unlike most entertainment legends who actively shape their legacy through memoirs, interviews, and careful curation of their life story, Johnny Carson maintained studied ambiguity about how he wished to be remembered. He never wrote an autobiography, never participated in a comprehensive retrospective of his career, never gave a final interview summing up his life and work. This deliberate silence about his own place in entertainment history stands as perhaps the most striking example of Carson's lifelong commitment to privacy. Publishers offered millions for his memoir. Documentary filmmakers proposed definitive retrospectives with him as the guiding voice. He turned them all down without explanation. This reluctance to participate in shaping his public memory created a vacuum that others have filled with their own interpretations of Carson's significance. What emerges from these enduring mysteries isn't just a portrait of an intensely private man, but a larger statement about fame itself, about the possibility of maintaining personal boundaries while living in the public eye. In our current era of constant exposure, where celebrities routinely share their most intimate thoughts across social media platforms, Carson's determined privacy seems almost radical. He maintained strict boundaries between his public persona and private self during an extraordinary 30-year run at the center of American culture. Carson understood something fundamental about fame that many celebrities still haven't figured out: that mystery is essential to longevity, that maintaining certain private spaces wasn't just psychologically healthy but professionally smart. The mysteries Johnny Carson took to the grave weren't simply information he forgot to share. They were deliberate silences that defined his approach to fame and formed the foundation of his remarkable longevity in America's living rooms.